Now, the nationally watched struggle for the state Senate in Wisconsin. Republicans defied a bid to oust them from power on Tuesday in a recall battle waged fiercely by unions for public employees and by anti-tax groups. Wisconsin voters lined up to cast ballots in huge numbers for an off-year summertime election. At stake, the Republicans' approach to deficit reduction.
This is people saying, hey, we want more of a voice in what's happening in our nation, in our country, in our state.
It's just like you say when you're a carpenter, you measure twice and you cut once. We already put her in office once. What do you want to take her out for?
In the end, 2 Republican state senators did lose their jobs, but 4 kept theirs. That means the GOP will retain control of the state Senate by at least a 1-vote margin. After the vote, Republican Governor Scott Walker struck a conciliatory note, saying in a statement, "I look forward to working with legislators of all parties to grow jobs for Wisconsin and move our state forward."
So help me God.
Walker's tone was decidedly more combative earlier this year, shortly after he took office, and fellow Republicans took control of both houses of the legislature.
We've got an economic and fiscal crisis in this state, and we need leaders who are going to stand up and look at things differently than what we've done in the past.
It wasn't long before mass protests erupted over Walker's approach to cutting the state's $3.6 billion deficit. He proposed slashing spending, raising no taxes, and most controversial of all, sharply curtailing public employees' right to collective bargaining. Teachers, firefighters, prison guards, and their supporters staged sit-ins under the state Capitol dome and rallied through cold winter nights.
This is not about protecting our pay and our benefits. It is about protecting our right to collectively bargain.
Democrats delayed a vote for weeks, fleeing Wisconsin to leave the state Senate short of a quorum. But Walker ultimately got to sign the measure into law after Republicans found a way to vote without the Democrats. That, in turn, triggered the recall drive. On the NewsHour last month, the governor was asked if he tried to move too sharply too fast.
I think what we weren't ready for, and I've said this before, I've had to make a change, was to spend more time in January and February building the case. But I think what we weren't prepared for was the national focus, the national attention, the national money that came in.
Your cuts to our schools, Senator Darling.
An unprecedented $35 million was spent on the recall campaigns, much of it on nearly nonstop TV ads, and much of it financed by national unions and interest groups.
Representative Sandy Pash let them down.
Some voters said the money could have been better spent.
If they would have saved all the money that they have put into all of this, they'd have had money to work with. It's crazy.
Next week, 2 Democratic senators face recalls of their own. And for more on the meaning of the recall results, we are joined by Craig Gilbert, Washington bureau chief of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and author of the blog, The Wisconsin Voter. And Craig, welcome. Thank you for being in. So first of all, what are the party leaders on each side saying about these results, and what they say explains them?
Well, Democrats are saying that they fell short, but they did something historic. They recalled 2 Republican senators in one election, never happened before in the state of Wisconsin, and they were fighting uphill in districts that leaned Republican, so it was a big mountain to climb. Republicans are pointing out quite legitimately that Democrats put a lot of money and effort into this and fell short. I mean, they fell 1 seat short of dealing a real body blow to Governor Walker and his agenda.
Now, you've been covering Wisconsin politics a long time. What do you think explains it? What do you think were the important factors?
Well, I think one reason Democrats did fall short is because they were playing on Republican turf. 5 of the 6 districts were Republican districts. That's what happens when you try to recall an incumbent in the other party. And also, the other thing that happened was Republican voters turned out to be just as motivated as Democratic voters. We didn't know that going in. We knew Democrats and their labor allies were very jacked up about this election. They were up in arms over Governor Walker and his agenda. But Governor Walker is arguably the most polarizing governor in America in terms of his almost unanimous support among Republicans and his unanimous opposition among Democrats, and that brings out people on both sides.
So you're saying actually the high turnout help the Republicans.
Well, it did. I think if you're in a recall election, you're the opposition, you want to take advantage of a small electorate and really skew the electorate toward your side.
Get the angry people out.
Get the angry people out and have the angry people really control the election. And that was really neutralized to some degree in some key districts by how motivated the Republican base is.
Now, I've been reading that the spending for these races was absolutely unprecedented, at something like $35 million, and that most of that financing came from outside the state. Who were the groups?
Well, on the left, they were the labor unions, of course, primarily, and some progressive groups like Emily's List and a number of other organizations. On the right, the groups on the right tended to be a little more shadowy. They were spending their money in a way that didn't have to be reported, so you didn't know exactly what they were spending or where the money was coming from.
But it has been said, for instance, that Club for Growth.
Yes, the Wisconsin chapter of Club for Growth was a big player, and these groups played a real role. I mean, their role in some respects was to try to disqualify some of the Democratic challengers, and some of these challengers had baggage that they exploited.
And the conservative billionaires, the Koch brothers?
We don't know where the money's coming from. We really don't, because it doesn't have to be reported.
Now, what about the campaign debate itself as it unfolded? We saw some of these ads. They didn't look like they were only about collective bargaining.
No, most of the ads were not about collective bargaining. I think the Democrats decided, to some degree the Republicans decided, that people knew how they felt about that issue, and even though that's the issue that produced this whole situation we're in, the Democrats talked about Medicare, they talked about the broader budget issues of school cuts, and the Republicans ran on typically Republican themes of cutting taxes and fiscal conservatism. So it became more of a stock partisan message war than just a labor battle.
Now, was it still focused on the battle over the budget deficit in Wisconsin, or did they broaden it out to really talk about the Republicans' approach to deficit reduction nationally?
Some of the Democratic ads did talk about Medicare. The author of that plan, of course, is Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, and they tried to tie Medicare cuts to Republican candidates. It's not clear how effective that was.
Now, as a longtime analyst of Wisconsin voting trends, as you know, this race, as the governor said, was eagerly watched nationally. Do you think it can be read as a harbinger of Wisconsin voters' attitudes going into the 2012 election?
Yeah, but it's a very mixed verdict. I mean, we had a big blowout for Barack Obama in 2008. That's gone. He's not going to have that in 2012. He's going to have a real tough slog, especially given the economy. We had the best Republican year since 1938 last year in Wisconsin, and that's not going to be the electorate of 2012 either. There are some signs, if you look at the voting returns this time around, that there was some erosion in Republican support. It wasn't enough to cost them the state Senate. But I think where we are is something closer to 2004. The election in Wisconsin in 2004 between Bush and Kerry was decided by a fraction of a percentage point. So very divided and an intensely mobilized electorate.
So it would definitely a swing state. What does this do? The Democrats had vowed to now mount a recall challenge to Governor Walker when he becomes eligible after a year in office, I think in January. Has this dimmed that?
Well, it complicates it both for financial reasons, or is Labor going to be able to put that kind of money into it after spending all the money this year, and also for psychological reasons. I mean, they're not going to sort of springboard from the energy and the boost of having taken back the state Senate. It's more complicated. I think we'll still see a recall drive against the governor, but Democrats have to make some tough decisions about that and tough decisions about the timing.
And what's next for organized labor nationally?
Well, they have a big referendum in Ohio coming up where they're taking on the law that was passed in Ohio that curtailed collective bargaining rights there. And I think, there's clearly frustration among labor that they fell just short of their goal. There's frustration that with all these big issues in play, some of these races came down to the personal vagaries and flaws of the candidates.
And very briefly, back to Wisconsin for a minute, Governor Walker, we saw this conciliatory statement from him. Do you think he's going to kind of cool his jets, or is he going to push forward with this? He still has other items on his agenda.
He has other items, but they've already enacted so much of their agenda that I think they can to some small degree, rest on their laurels. They have, unless they can pick off a Democratic legislator or two next week, they're going to have a much smaller margin in the state Senate. And it's clear that Governor Walker is trying to redefine himself a little bit as a less polarizing governor.
Well, Craig Gilbert of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, thank you so much.
Pleasure.